Yes, we have inflation in the system, but it's not all the fault of the war in Ukraine. Yes, there are some price shocks, but actually we've been creating far too much money for far too long. Huge increases in the money supply across the Western world have led to inflation. And by some measures, our inflation is worse than other countries. And Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, has stepped in to say, this is because of Brexit. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And I'm going to debate that point with two people. I'll put my two penneth in to begin with. We have the highest electricity prices, the biggest green taxes of any country in the West. Is it any surprising that we have inflation that is more than some other European countries? Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me down the line, Conservative Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and presenter of this show, but not... Well, he's sort of half doing it this evening. Now, Jacob, we're used to everything being blamed on Brexit. Does Carney have half a point when it comes to food inflation?
No, none at all. That he was responsible for monetary policy, and he failed in terms of monetary policy. He kept on saying that he would soon tighten it, he'd soon put up interest rates, and he'd reverse quantitative easing. He never did it. He just encouraged quantitative easing to carry on, which set the platform for the high inflation rate that we've got. In terms of food inflation, actually Brexit gives us a real opportunity to lower prices, if only we take it, and remove tariff barriers on food coming from outside the European Union. Because currently we have a protectionist system that doesn't particularly protect British farmers, but it protects Irish farmers and French and Dutch farmers, which is not to the benefit of the British consumer.
OK, I'm joined also by Vicky Pryce, Chief Economic Advisor to the Centre for Economic Business and Research. Vicky, Jacob makes the point that Carney's just wrong. But Carney seems to really believe strongly that Brexit's had inflationary impacts. What's your view?
Well, first of all, on what Jacob said about quantitative easing and not reversing that in time, perhaps loads of other countries have done exactly that. So if you look at what's been going on in the States, what's been going on in Japan, Japan has done much more than all of us, and inflation is only just about creeping up to 3.5% right now, after decades of just pouring money into the economy. So it's not that. That distinguishes it, I think, from the others. So we have to just look at what is it that makes a difference here. Food isn't the issue either, and I think I agree there with Jacob as well, that there have been big food price increases in Europe as well, and they've had to cope with that too. But I think there are nevertheless issues to do with Brexit, which have to do mostly with the fact that we have got barriers in terms of trade. It's not so much tariffs, but it is much more difficult to bring things in and also to send things out. So, and also, in addition, we have had a shortage of labour. Yes, of course, many more migrants are coming now, but in reality, quite a lot of the sectors where EU workers were very prominent, such as hospitality, for example, the tourism sector, construction, they have been sort of bled dry of workers, and there's been a real shortage as a result.
And yet, Vicky Pryce, net migration figures are eye-watering. They're almost 3 times what they were before Brexit.
Yes, but as I said, the people coming in are not necessarily going to do those jobs. It's mainly skilled, high-skilled people who are coming in, which is actually good news in many ways, but quite a lot of the workers who are coming from the EU may have been quite skilled themselves in terms of the education they had, but they were coming to help in areas where the skills were not necessarily needed. So that has gone, which has meant that staff shortages in the UK have been worse than elsewhere. And one of the reasons why wage demands have been greater as well, because, of course, it has been sensed very easily that there is a demand there and it needs to be paid for by whoever it is who's hiring people.
But Carney takes no responsibility for the monetary policy that was put in place, the massive increases of money supply. His successor, Andrew Bailey, was way too slow to raise interest rates, whilst the Fed were raising very quickly. Surely the Bank of England themselves, including Carney, bear some responsibility for not understanding any of this.
It's interesting you say that. Of course, we put interest rates up before the US did. We started earlier. There's the end of 2022.
Much harder.
Yes. Then they came in and started, and of course they are about 1 point higher than we are. It's absolutely true. When you look at what happened in Europe, Europe still had negative interest rates in July of last year, so they did it quite late. So in some ways, we were ahead of the curve from that point of view. So you can't blame the slowness of raising interest rates by comparison to others.
The Eurozone's in recession now, and we're not quite, well, we're going to be, I'm sure. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
You've just made the point that the Eurozone is in recession and we're not, and therefore we are getting economic growth, which almost invariably indicates a higher level of inflation. So that's a key part of it. The monetary policy issue is that we went on expanding the money supply during the COVID period, which extended the excess of money in the system, and that clearly had a link to inflation, and that was actually post-Carney, that was Bailey, but that was a problem of the Bank of England, so you're right to be putting the blame on the Bank of England. And as regards the wage push inflation that Vicky mentioned, well, wages are rising slower than prices, so it can't be wage push inflation at this stage, and wages have been catching up with prices rather than the other way around.
OK, Jacob, thank you very much indeed. I'll give you the final word. Vicky Pryce on this debate.
Well, the quantitative easing that took place, of course, the Bank of England was very doing an awful lot of that, and that is indeed correct. But so did the others. We didn't do it differently to others. The US did huge amount of quantitative easing, as did the European Central Bank, as did all the others, as I mentioned earlier. So it isn't that. But it's interesting about wages. First of all, I mentioned the staff shortages that exist in some areas. But I think there has been a different issue which has got very little to do with Brexit, which is really centred around the inflation expectations of people. In this country, we stepped in much later than others to do something about energy costs, for example. We didn't do much about controlling food prices. In loads of countries, there are voluntary or mandatory restrictions on food price increases. That has encouraged people here to think that inflation was going to be very high. You remember at the time of Liz Truss in particular, before, we were talking, before she actually introduced the electricity price guarantee, which is good news in terms of inflation, we were thinking about inflation perhaps going up to 18%, even higher. So, of course, wage demand started piling up.
And green taxes?
Well, that is indeed an issue, but green taxes were there anyway. The question is, did we increase the green taxes? And we didn't. So that doesn't cause inflation.
I suppose when the fuel price went up, it meant transporting food was more expensive. One thing for certain, Vicky Pryce, this is a debate that never, ever goes away. I remember growing up and the arguments were all about inflation, and hey, it's 2023 and we're back where we started.
Absolutely.
Thank you.